Hello, grade 10s. Let's continue on with our investigation of velocity and distance and time and how the three of those are related. So I'm just going to start on the slide that we finished on our last lesson. Let me pull it up here. I don't want to do a screen, do a window. There we go. Okay. So we talked about that conversion between kilometers per hour and meters per second. Now, like I said, when I am in the classroom, I spend a little bit more time on this, showing you exactly where that number 3.6 comes from. Because of the circumstance we're in right now, I'm just going to leave it at that. It has to do with the fact that there is 1,000 meters in a kilometer, and there's 3,600 seconds in an hour. So if I take that 1,000 and I divide it by 3,600, I get the equivalent of dividing by 3.6. I would take this kilometer, I would multiply it by 1,000 to convert to meters, and then I would divide by 3,600 to convert to seconds from hours. What that ends up giving you is like you're multiplying by 0.036, right? Which is the same thing as dividing by 3.6. So that's where that comes from. So that's your conversion factor. All of these you just divide by 3.6 to get meters per second. Now, if you want to go from meters per second to kilometers per hour, you multiply by 3.6. So let's move on. How to calculate velocity now. Now, in the real world, for us to want to calculate velocity, there's, a really common way to do it is with radar guns. What radar guns do is they calculate velocity almost instantaneously because the radar guns have laser beams inside of them and an internal calculator that can calculate the velocity of moving vehicles or moving baseballs or whatever it might be that you're trying to find the velocity for. What that calculator inside is doing is it's using the following formula. Velocity is just equal to how much distance we cover in a certain amount of time. That's all we're saying when we're talking about how fast we're going. We're saying that if I'm driving 100 kilometers per hour, that means that if I drove for an hour, I would go 100 kilometers. So it's just velocity equals distance over time. Our shorthand for that is V equals D over T. Now, what do all those stand for? I think it's pretty straightforward. D stands for distance, generally either in kilometers or in meters. T is time, which is generally either in hours if we're using kilometers, or seconds if we're using meters. And then our velocity, V, is either in kilometers per hour or meters per second. Now, when you know the distance that an object has traveled, and you know the time it took for them to cover that distance, you can use division to calculate what that object's average speed was over that time period. Now, obviously, that object maybe, in real life, if it was us running, we didn't run if we ran, I don't know, 2 miles or something, right? If we didn't run at an exact, chances are that we didn't run at an exact constant velocity the entire time. We probably sped up at certain points. Maybe at the start we're going faster than we were at the end. But if we know how long it took for us to run those 2 miles, then we can find what our average speed was for that entire time period. So here are the steps that you're going to do when you have some problems that you need to do in this section. You are first off going to list the information that's given in the problem. So this is all the stuff that you know. This is the stuff that I have told you in the question. Okay, you're going to place each piece of information beside the symbol that it represents. So what it might look like is t equals 5 seconds. If in the question I said that it's 5 seconds for something to happen. Step 2, you're going to put a question mark beside the item that is required. So what you don't know. So if I maybe asked you to find what the velocity was, you would say v equals question mark. Then you're going to write out the formula that you need to use. And then you're going to substitute all of your known values into that formula. And what you should end up with is several knowns, like several values that you do know, generally 2 or maybe 3 or 4 as it gets more difficult. And then one that you're trying to look for. So one unknown. And then you have to do math. Excuse me, just sneezed. You have to do math to solve for the unknowns. You have to do some algebra. Okay, so rearranging those equations. Let's do an example together. This is almost, I've considered changing this example several times because it is so easy. It almost makes it less impactful because it's easy. So a cue ball on a pool table travels 2 meters towards the 8 ball. If it takes 1 second for the cue ball to reach the 8 ball, how fast is it moving in meters per second? I mean, looking at that, if we have a general grasp of what I've been talking about, you should be able to solve that almost right away. 2 meters in 1 second. That means that meters per second, it is going 2 meters per second, right? That's why I wanted to change it because you can actually get it immediately. The ball travels 2 meters. This is the distance. You would write D equals 2m. Then the ball takes 1 second. That's time. So you would write T equals 1s. We're trying to find V. We're trying to find velocity. So you could say V equals question mark. What is the correct formula to use? Well, V equals D over T. Velocity equals distance over time. So D equals 2 meters, T equals 1 second, V equals question mark. Then I go V equals D over T, which is just 2 over 1, and 2 divided by 1 is just 2. So our final answer is the ball was traveling at 2 meters per second. Okay, if I went through any of those slides too fast, you can just pause the video at that given time and write the stuff down. A snowboarder makes it down a 1,000-meter run, long run, 1,000-meter run in 60 seconds. What was her velocity? It's pretty fast. So we know D equals 1,000 meters. We know T equals 60 seconds. And we're trying to find V. V equals question mark. So V equals D over T. That's our formula. So D is 1,000, T is 60. So V is equal to 1,000 divided by 60. If you plug that into your calculators, so here's something that I need you to do. I need you to get a calculator that you can use. You will get V equals 16.667 meters per second. 16.667 meters per second. Now, if I'm just curious, genuinely curious about what that is in kilometers per hour, I take 16.667 and I multiply it by 3.6, right? Remember, our magic number is 3.6. That's how we convert from meters per second to kilometers per hour. And what that gives me is 60 kilometers per hour. That's really fast for a snowboarder. Depends how good she is, though, I guess, right? So the snowboarder's velocity is 16.7 meters. In physics, we calculate velocity in meters per second unless it's otherwise stated in the calculation or in the question. So this does mean that you will need to convert units before you do your calculations. So here are some really important conversions to remember when you're doing this stuff in a question. There's 1,000 meters in 1 kilometer. There's 100 centimeters in 1 meter. So there's often times where I'll give you distances in either kilometers or in centimeters, and I'll expect you to convert them to meters. You need to be able to convert. If I have given you 400 centimeters, you need to tell me how many meters that is. How would you do that? How would you go from 400 centimeters to 1 meter? Well, you would take 400 and you would divide it by 100 because there's 100 centimeters in a meter. And that would give you 4 meters, which makes sense. There's 100 centimeters in 1 meter, then 400 centimeters is 4 meters. Another big one is that there's 60 minutes in an hour and there's 60 seconds, obviously, in a minute. So doing that conversion, if I told you that something took 3 minutes, how many seconds is that? Well, for every minute, you have 60 seconds. So if I did 3 minutes, it would be 3 times 60, which is 180 seconds. You'll get better at that as you practice it some more. But for the time being, let's move on, and you can do these notes, and then you've got some practice problems that you need to do. So if you don't like using the formulas like I gave it to you, V equals D over T, you can use something called an equation triangle. Okay, equation triangles can be extremely useful if you know how to use them properly. So what you do is, if you're having trouble figuring out, okay, if I gave you time, what's my velocity equals distance over time? But if I'm trying to find time, how do I relate velocity and distance to one another? right? So I've been given time in the question, how do I relate velocity and distance to one another? Well, you might not be very good at algebra at this point, right? You haven't practiced it a whole bunch in maybe a little while. Well, what you would do is you would end up moving time. You would multiply by time on both sides. You would get time times velocity equals distance right there. And then you would divide by velocity and you would get time equals distance over velocity. Now, if you're not super comfortable with that, what you can do is you can use the equation triangle. So say you're trying to find time right here, okay? This is, just imagine this is like my thumb covering it up, okay? That's my thumb covering up time. So if you couldn't see time, so just imagine that you can't see it, you've covered it up with your thumb because that's the one that you're trying to find, you're left with d over v, distance over velocity, okay? So this is extremely important, right? This is a division. And so is this. I don't know why I decided to write with the highlighter today. Okay, so if I was trying to find velocity, cover it up, and I end up with d over t. If I'm trying to find distance, cover it up, and I end up with v times t. So it's pretty useful to use an equation triangle as well, if you're not comfortable with the math. Now, I would ideally like everybody to be able to do just the math regularly, but for the time being, use the equation triangle if you need. Now, there's 5 practice problems that I want you to work on. You can pause the video right now, and you can work on those. And then now I will post the answers here for all 5. Oh, there's 4. Sorry, there's only 4. But there's the answers for all 4, and you can pause the video now if you want to be able to work with and check your answers. Now, after those 4 questions, what I want you to work on tomorrow, there's another 9 questions on the next page. Okay, so you can work on that, the next page, or you can finish that all today, and then you don't have much you have to do tomorrow. So up to you how you want to allocate that time. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to let me know. You can send me an email or you can leave a comment below. But that is it for today's lesson. So have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.